Tonight, you step into the cold, smoke-filled world of a medieval executioner, a man feared by every town, avoided at every table, yet desperately needed whenever the bells began to toll. You wake before dawn beside damp stone walls, sharpened steel by candlelight, walk muddy roads through winter fog, and carry out the darkest duty in the kingdom while the rest of the town watches from the market square. But behind the fear and whispers lies a strange, lonely life most people never imagine. So, if you enjoy immersive medieval stories told slowly beside the fire, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you're watching from tonight and what time it is there. Now, settle in, lower the lights, and let's wander into the long medieval night together. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing in the blue-grey darkness before dawn, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak that smells faintly of damp wool, smoke, and old rainwater. The cold reaches you first, not the clean cold of fresh mountain air, but the wet medieval kind that creeps patiently through boots and settles into your joints like an unpaid tax collector. Beneath your feet, the ground is a churn of mud, straw, and frozen wagon ruts, somewhere nearby. Unseen horses snort clouds of steam into the winter air while a church bell groans faintly through the mist. Above you rises the crooked outline of a small executioner's lodging pressed against the outer edge of the town wall, built close enough to civilization to serve it, yet far enough away that respectable people sleep easier at night. Medieval town planners truly mastered the art of saying, "We need you desperately, but perhaps remain over there beside the ditch." Smoke curls lazily from chimney holes across the sleeping town. You smell wet oak ash, stale ale, and river fog drifting in from the reeds beyond the wall. Somewhere in the darkness, a dog barks once and then thinks better of it. You probably would not last a week out here, honestly. Your hands alone would surrender by the second morning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to comment your location and local time. It is strangely comforting to imagine candles glowing in distant windows while this old road unwinds before us. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door behind you groans softly as you step inside the lodging. Warmth does not exactly greet you, but compared to the frost outside, the room feels almost generous. Rushes cover the uneven stone floor, though they have long since surrendered any pleasant smell they may once have possessed. Beeswax candles sputter weakly along a shelf blackened by years of soot. Overhead, smoke clings stubbornly to the rafters where strips of drying herbs sway gently in the draught. You move quietly. Executioners tend to learn quietness early. The room contains little. A rough wooden table scarred by knives, an iron pot hanging over embers barely alive, a narrow bed stuffed with straw that crackles every time you shift your weight. Beside the bed rests a stout oak chest bound with iron bands. The tools wait inside. Outside, the monastery bell tolls once for the waking hour. Not everyone rises to it willingly. Bakers curse it. Monks welcome it. Travellers ignore it when they can. But for you, the bell marks obligation. Medieval life runs on bells the way modern life runs on panic. You kneel beside the chest and lift the lid carefully. Inside lies the work of your office wrapped in wool cloths, leather gloves rubbed smooth with tallow, straps, whetstones, clean linen, and several tools whose precise shapes disappear politely beneath folds of fabric. You inspect each item methodically, not because you enjoy it, but because medieval towns value competence far more than kindness when it comes to difficult professions. Some swear executioners carry charms sewn secretly into their gloves to keep the dead from following them home. Others insist the tools themselves absorb bad fortune over time like wet wood absorbing smoke. No one can quite agree whether those tales began from fear or simple boredom during long winters. You check the edge of a blade by candlelight. The metal reflects gold for an instant before the flame gutters. Then comes the familiar sound at the door. Scratch, scratch. A pause. Scratch again. You sigh softly and unlatch it. The dog waits outside exactly where you expected him. Thin, mud-coloured, missing half an ear, and carrying the solemn expression of a monk disappointed by human behaviour. He slips past your boots without invitation and circles twice beside the hearth, before collapsing heavily into the rushes. You have never named him. Medieval people wisely avoided emotional attachment when most things died before spring. Yet the dog appears every dawn regardless, as dependable as taxes and damp socks. You stir the embers gently and add a piece of peat. The fire wakes reluctantly. Heat spreads slowly through the room while shadows climb the walls. Breakfast is hardly grand. A crust of coarse rye bread, cold smoked fish wrapped in cloth, weak ale safer than most water. You eat standing beside the hearth while the dog watches with theatrical suffering, despite clearly having stolen half a chicken from somewhere recently. Beyond the shuttered window, the town begins stirring awake. Wagon wheels creak faintly. A rooster attempts optimism. Farther off, you hear the scrape of market stalls opening in the square. Today will be busy. Execution days always are. Not because townspeople enjoy punishment exactly, though some certainly pretend otherwise. Public justice in the medieval world serves many purposes at once: warning, ritual, gossip, spectacle, reassurance. It reminds hungry peasants that laws still exist even during bad winters. It reminds nervous merchants that roads remain guarded. It reminds local lords that order survives another week. Mostly, though, it gives people something to talk about besides weather and turnips. You wrap your cloak tighter and sit briefly on the stool beside the fire. For a moment, the room settles into near silence except for crackling peat and distant bells drifting through fog. Your hands bear old scars, small ones mostly. Rope burns, splinters, nicks from sharpening tools by dim light after exhausting days. Nothing dramatic. Medieval work rarely looks heroic up close. It mostly looks uncomfortable. From the shelf above the hearth hangs a small pilgrim badge tarnished nearly black with age. Tin pressed into the shape of a saint no one entirely trusts anymore. You found it years ago, buried in roadside mud after spring floods. Some claim carrying saints' tokens wards off fever. Others believe abandoned relics attract misfortune instead. Even now, it is hard to tell whether you keep the badge from faith or habit. Another bell rings. Closer now. The jailer will already be awake. You stand slowly, joints protesting the cold. Layer by layer, you dress for the day: wool tunic, thick belt, cloak, gloves. Finally, you gather the wrapped tools into a leather satchel darkened by rain and years of handling. The dog lifts his head sleepily as you move toward the door. You are not invited, you mutter. He follows anyway. Outside, dawn crawls weakly over the fields beyond the town wall. Frost glitters pale along broken cart tracks. River mist curls low through bare trees. Above the gatehouse, watchfires still burn orange against the fading night. You begin walking toward the town. Boots sink softly into mud. The day has started, and somewhere ahead, beneath stone towers and smoke-black rafters, The bells continue counting the hours for everyone equally: monks, bakers, prisoners, merchants, beggars, and the man everyone needs but few willingly touch. The road toward the gatehouse bends along the outer wall like a strip of dark ribbon pressed into frost. Dawn has not fully arrived yet. The world remains caught between night and morning, between silence and labour. Mist hangs low over the ditches, pale as watered milk, while the town walls rise above you in damp stone layers patched with moss and old repairs. Generations of masons have added to these walls the way generations of cooks add to soup, one rough handful at a time and with varying degrees of confidence. Your boots sink into the muddy track with soft sucking sounds. The dog trots several paces ahead, nose low, tail swaying with the steady seriousness of a creature who considers ditch water an important field of research. From farther down the road comes the slow rattle of wagon wheels. A pair of market carts emerges through the mist, pulled by broad horses wearing bells around their harnesses. The bells chime softly with each step. One cart carries barrels bound in iron hoops. Ale, probably. The other overflows with winter cabbages and bundles of onions tied neatly with twine. The smell reaches you before the merchants do. The lead driver notices you immediately. People always do. Conversation dies quietly between the two men. One touches two fingers briefly against the little wooden saint hanging at his neck. Not openly fearful, not exactly rude either, just cautious. Medieval people possess an extraordinary ability to fear bad luck while pretending they do not. You step aside to let the wagons pass. "Mornin'," the older driver mutters without meeting your eyes. "Mornin'." The younger man stares openly at the satchel hanging from your shoulder. He cannot help himself. Few people can. Curiosity always wrestles fear to a draw eventually. The wagons continue toward the gatehouse, wheels crunching over frozen ruts. The dog watches them go with mild disappointment, perhaps hoping for dropped cabbage leaves. Ahead, the first shapes of the town gate begin to emerge from the fog. The gatehouse rises squat and heavy above the road, its twin towers dark against the whitening sky. Watchfires flicker atop the walls where sleepy guards stamp their boots against the cold. Long banners hang damp and motionless beside narrow arrow slits. Beneath the archway itself, iron teeth of the portcullis glint faintly with frost. A watchman leans over the parapet overhead. Gate opens at bell, he calls down lazily. "You opened it yesterday before bell." "Aye," the guard replies. "Yesterday I was warmer." "Fair enough." You settle beside the wall to wait. Others gather slowly near the gate, peasants carrying baskets of eggs wrapped carefully in straw. A shepherd smelling strongly of wet sheep. Two pilgrims wearing cockle shell badges sewn crookedly onto patched cloaks. One pilgrim coughs constantly into a wool cloth while the other mutters prayers beneath his breath. Pilgrims appear everywhere this time of year despite roads being nearly unfit for human movement. Some travel for healing, some for penance, some simply because remaining home sounds worse. No one can quite agree whether saints truly perform miracles along the roads, though roadside tavern owners seem suspiciously enthusiastic about the possibility. The younger pilgrim notices the dog first. "Friendly beast," he says softly. "Questionable judgment, you answer." The pilgrim chuckles before realizing who exactly he is speaking to. Then comes the familiar moment. Eyes flick toward your satchel, toward your gloves, toward the quiet space people unconsciously leave around you. His smile fades politely. Not hatred, rarely hatred. Just distance. A bell tolls overhead from somewhere inside the town. Immediately chains rattle within the gatehouse. Wooden gears groan. The portcullis rises slowly with a metallic shriek loud enough to wake half the dead and at least 3 irritated monks. The crowd begins moving. You pass beneath the archway into shadow thick with the smells of wet stone, horse dung, torch smoke, and old urine. Medieval gates are marvellous defensive structures and deeply disappointing air fresheners. Guards stand beside murder holes overhead where boiling oil supposedly waits during sieges. In truth, most towns cannot afford enough oil to waste it on invaders. Some swear defenders used heated sand instead. Others insist chamber pots worked just as well. History, as always, remains slightly less glorious than songs suggest. Inside the gatehouse chamber, warmth spills from a brazier near the wall. Clerks already hunch over rough tables, scratching records onto parchment with ink-stained fingers. A sleepy boy carries armfuls of firewood across the room, while trying unsuccessfully not to yawn. One of the guards nods as you enter. "You're early. You're sober. A miracle for us both." The guard grins faintly. You know him well enough. Thomas. Broad shoulders, broken nose, always smelling faintly of onions and lamp oil. Like most guards, he treats you with cautious respect. Men who spend their lives near prisons and punishments tend to lose certain illusions faster than others. Near the brazier hangs a cluster of iron keys large enough to anchor fishing boats. The jailer himself emerges from a side corridor adjusting his belt. Master Edric is old, grey-bearded, and permanently bent slightly sideways as though years of carrying keys have warped him physically. "There you are," he mutters. "Thought the frost might have claimed you." "Not yet. Pity? Could have delayed paperwork." He waves you toward the inner chamber. Paperwork exists even here. Naturally. Medieval bureaucracy crawls along beneath everything like ivy beneath stone. Sentences copied by candlelight, names scratched into records, fines counted, seals pressed into wax. Kingdoms survive less through glory than through exhausted clerks refusing to lose track of taxes. You warm your hands briefly beside the brazier while Edric shuffles through parchment rolls. The room hums quietly with morning routine. Guards changing shifts, messengers arriving breathless from nearby villages. A clerk muttering curses after spilling ink across yesterday's toll records. Somewhere below your feet, from deep beneath the stone floor, comes the muffled clang of a prison door. The sound settles heavily into the room before fading again. No one comments on it. Outside, through narrow windows, the market square continues waking. Smoke rises from cook fires. Merchants hammer wooden pegs into stalls. Bells drift from distant monasteries beyond the river. The dog curls beside the brazier as though he owns the place. "Still got that beast following you?" Thomas asks. He has poor instincts. "Better than marrying one of my cousins," Thomas says. "They bite worse." You almost smile. Almost. Edric finally hands you a folded parchment sealed with dark wax. "There, official order." You tuck it carefully inside your cloak without opening it yet. You already know what waits inside. Charges. Time. Witness marks. Formal language attempting to place neat borders around human misery. A draft creeps through the chamber from somewhere unseen. The brazier sputters briefly. One of the younger guards crosses himself quietly. You notice. He notices you noticing. "Bad draft," he mutters defensively. Of course. Some swear cold drafts in old prisons mean wandering souls searching for warmth. Others blame poor masonry. Given medieval construction methods, honestly, both explanations feel equally convincing. The bell tolls again overhead. Morning advances slowly through the walls. And with every passing hour, the town beyond the gatehouse grows louder, warmer, busier, while beneath the stone corridors below, Another kind of waiting continues in darkness. The inner corridor of the gatehouse smells of damp mortar, rushlights, and old straw that should have been changed weeks ago. Water beads along the stone walls where winter cold seeps inward from the earth beyond the foundations. Your boots echo softly as you follow Master Edric deeper into the passage, past narrow alcoves where guards keep spears stacked like bundles of dead reeds. The sounds of the waking town fade behind you. Down here, time moves differently. A pair of candles burns before a small wooden carving of St. Jude, patron of desperate causes and, judging by the condition of the corridor, apparently also patron of leaking ceilings. Wax has pooled thickly along the little shelf beneath the carving. Someone has tucked dried rosemary beside it to keep away sickness. Whether it works remains uncertain. Medieval people place remarkable confidence in herbs considering how frequently everyone still dies of fevers. Edric walks slowly ahead, iron keys clanking against his belt with every step. Cold enough to freeze a bishop's sermons, he mutters. You've met warmer bishops than I have. Fair point. The corridor bends sharply and widens into a record chamber lit by two smoky lanterns. Here the machinery of law settles heavily over everything. Shelves bow beneath stacks of parchment rolls tied with faded ribbon. Wax tablets lie piled beside sand shakers and chipped ink pots. An exhausted clerk sits hunched at a desk, lips moving silently as he copies names into a ledger thick enough to stop a crossbow bolt. He glances up when you enter, then quickly looks back down again. Not from disrespect, from habit. People prefer not to linger too long beneath your gaze, as though merely standing near you might encourage fate to notice them next. Edric moves toward a table crowded with documents sealed in red and green wax. Town Reeve wants signatures done proper this time, he says. Last month's complaint reached the manor court. You remove your gloves slowly and flex stiff fingers near the lantern warmth. What complaint? The widow claimed the hanging platform leaned left. You stare at him. Edric shrugs. She said it looked unprofessional. A silence follows. Then the clerk at the desk snorts unexpectedly into his sleeve before trying desperately to pretend he did not. Even you laugh quietly at that. Medieval towns, you've learned, possess an astonishing ability to argue over absolutely everything. Grain tolls, pig boundaries, bell schedules, the angle of execution platforms. Civilization rests upon very fragile foundations. You step closer to the table while Edric unties several parchment rolls. The official order lies among them, written in cramped Latin by a monastery-trained scribe whose elegant handwriting far exceeds the elegance of the situation itself. Wax seals bear the marks of local authority the reeve, the magistrate, the town steward, layers upon layers of permission required simply for one human being to stop breathing beneath public law. The clerk dips his quill again. Scratch, scratch. Ink stains his fingers black clear to the knuckles. No one can quite agree when medieval courts became so obsessed with records. Some say written law protects fairness. Others insist it merely protects officials from blame. Either way, scribes multiply faster than rabbits wherever kingdoms grow wealthy enough to afford parchment. Edric points toward a line near the bottom. Need your mark there. You take the quill. Your handwriting remains rough, functional at best. Executioners rarely receive monastery educations. Most learn letters only because records demand it. Still, your name settles across the parchment firmly enough. The clerk sprinkles sand over wet ink. Done. For a moment. Only the hiss of lanterns fills the chamber. Then from beyond the far wall comes the distant sound of coughing. One of the cells below. The sound lingers longer than expected, dry, exhausted, human. Edric pauses briefly. Prison fever's been through twice this winter, he says quietly. Could smell it before the first deaths even started. You nod once. Prisons collect illness the way monasteries collect candles. Crowded stone chambers, damp straw, weak soup, bad air. Some physicians blame foul vapours, others blame imbalanced humours. A travelling barber surgeon once claimed too much melancholy in the spleen caused half the kingdom's suffering. Medieval medicine often sounds like someone losing an argument with soup ingredients. The coughing fades. You pull your gloves back on. Near the rear shelf sits a small locked chest banded in black iron. You recognise it immediately. The relic box. Every town keeps strange things somewhere, charms, confiscated objects, bones supposedly belonging to saints of questionable authenticity. The gatehouse chest contains items taken from prisoners over many years, dice carved from knuckle bones, silver charms, dried herbs sewn into collars, tiny leather pouches filled with ash or teeth. Edric notices your glance. Still there, he mutters. No one threw it away yet. No one wants to touch it. Naturally. There is always an object people fear for reasons no one fully remembers. Years ago, a condemned man arrived carrying a tiny bronze bell tied beneath his tunic. He swore it kept evil spirits from claiming sleepers during winter nights. After his death, 3 guards reportedly heard ringing from the evidence chest long after midnight. 1 guard quit, another took monastery vows. The 3rd drank heavily for several months and blamed mice. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the story survives because it happened or simply because medieval people adore frightening themselves beside fires. Edric gathers fresh keys from the wall hook. We should go below soon. But neither of you moves immediately. Instead, you stand together near the lantern glow while morning slowly strengthens outside the narrow windows. Light creeps across shelves crowded with parchment and dust. Somewhere above, wagon wheels rumble through the streets toward the market square. Bells toll again from the abbey beyond the river. The dog wanders into the chamber at last, nails clicking softly on stone. The clerk eyes him nervously. He shouldn't be down here. He ignores authority. You reply. Smart creature. The dog circles once beside the relic chest before abruptly refusing to go nearer. Ears flatten slightly. He backs away toward the lantern light. Edric notices too. Neither of you comments further. Some things feel better left uninterpreted. A younger jailer appears suddenly in the doorway carrying a bucket of fresh rushes over one shoulder. Cells are ready, he says quietly. Ready. Such a simple word for complicated business. You take a slow breath. Cold air settles deep into your lungs, carrying smells of wax smoke, damp parchment, and distant rain drifting through unseen cracks in the wall. Then you follow Edric once more through the corridor toward the stair descending below the gatehouse. Down there waits the next hour of the morning, and below the fading lantern light, beneath worn stone steps hollowed by centuries of boots, the bells above continue counting time for everyone equally clerk, prisoner, guard, merchant, stray dog, and the tired executioner walking steadily into the cold underground dark. The stairway down to the lower cells curves tightly beneath the gatehouse, worn smooth at the centre by generations of boots. Moisture gathers along the walls in silver beads that catch the lantern light like tiny coins. The deeper you descend, the colder the air becomes, until even your breath drifts pale before your face. Behind you, the sounds of the town fade almost entirely. No market noise, no bells, only stone, keys, and the distant drip of water somewhere in the dark. Edric lifts the lantern higher as the corridor opens into the prison level. Rows of oak doors line the walls, each reinforced with iron bands blackened by age. Straw litters the floor unevenly, some fresh, some not fresh at all. Medieval sanitation often operates under the optimistic theory that eventually another smell will overpower the first one. From one cell comes snoring loud enough to suggest genuine talent, from another, low muttering prayers. Somewhere farther down, someone quietly weeps into the darkness with the exhausted rhythm of a leaking roof. You pass slowly through it all. Most prisoners avoid looking directly at you. A few stare too long. People react strangely to executioners once stone walls stand between them and freedom. Some become polite, some angry, some suddenly philosophical in ways they never bothered attempting outside prison. One old man grips the bars as you pass. "You the headsman?" "That depends who's asking." "Man in cell 3 owes me 2 chickens." You glance toward Edric. "He says that to everyone," the jailer sighs. "Because everyone owes me chickens," the prisoner insists. The dog pads quietly behind you, surprisingly calm among the cells. Perhaps he senses that everyone down here already smells equally miserable. At the corridor's end stands a narrow chamber near the prison chapel. A tiny fire burns in a brazier there, fighting a losing battle against the damp. A young priest sits beside it, wrapped in heavy wool robes, hands tucked deep into his sleeves. Father Ansel, thin as candle wax, eyes permanently tired, ink stains on 2 fingers where he copies monastery texts during quieter hours. He rises as you approach. "You're early, so I've been told." The priest nods gently. In truth, he treats you better than most clergy do. Not warmly exactly, but honestly. Monks and priests spend enough time around death that many eventually stop pretending certain work can be avoided forever. On the little chapel table rests a wooden cross, a chipped clay cup, and several bundles of dried herbs tied with string, lavender, sage, mugwort. "Still burning herbs, you ask?" "For the smell." "That all?" Father Ansel pauses. No one can quite agree. Fair answer. Some swear certain herbs calm restless spirits before death. Others claim the smoke simply musks prison odours long enough for prayer to feel possible. Medieval faith and superstition often share blankets during winter. The priest gestures toward the bench near the brazier. "You should eat something before the square fills." You settle onto the bench heavily while Edric disappears farther down the corridor with his keys rattling softly behind him. Father Ansel unwraps a cloth bundle containing breakfast. Simple fare, coarse bread still warm near the centre, a wedge of hard cheese, onion pottage in a small iron pot beside the brazier. The smell alone improves the room considerably. You tear bread slowly while the priest pours weak ale into clay cups. Outside the tiny chapel window, dawn has finally begun spreading pale gold across the frost. "Market'll be crowded today," Ansel murmurs. "It usually is. A relic seller arrived yesterday." You sigh quietly. Wonderful. Relic merchants drift endlessly along medieval roads selling questionable fragments of saints to anyone possessing both coin and imagination. Fingers of apostles, splinters from holy doors, feathers supposedly dropped by angels. One traveller once attempted selling authentic dust from Jerusalem, which turned out, after careful investigation, to be ordinary dust. Though admittedly very convincing dust. Father Ansel smiles faintly at your expression. He claims this one's a tooth from St. Brigid. Human or horse? He did not specify. The dog lifts his head hopefully as crumbs fall from your bread. You hand him a piece. Traitorously, he accepts. For a while the room settles into quiet warmth. The brazier crackles softly. Water drips somewhere beyond the wall, above, muffled through layers of stone. The distant town slowly grows louder with carts and bells and waking voices, Father Ansel studies the fire. Did you sleep? Enough. Dreams. You shrug. Only weather. Lucky. The priest stares briefly into the brazier before speaking again. Some swear dreams before executions carry warnings. About what? Depends who's telling it. Of course it does. There are endless beliefs surrounding death in these towns. Cover mirrors so spirits do not become trapped. Open windows at the final breath. Place coins beneath tongues. Burn rosemary for remembrance. Tie rowan branches above doors. No one fully agrees which customs matter most, yet everyone grows nervous when they are ignored. A sudden burst of laughter erupts from a nearby cell. Then coughing. Then silence again. Father Ansel rubs tired eyes. Hard winter, he says quietly. You nod once. You've seen it yourself while crossing fields beyond the town. Thin cattle, empty storehouses, smoke rising from peat instead of proper firewood because forests near the roads were stripped long ago. Villagers boiling nettles into soup thick enough to trick the stomach briefly. Public punishments grow more frequent during hungry winters. Theft rises. Tempers shorten. Lords become nervous. And nervous lords prefer visible order. Edric returns at last, slower now. He's awake, the jailer says softly. Neither you nor Ansel responds immediately. The priest reaches for the wooden cross on the table and slips it carefully into his sleeve. Then he stands. I'll speak with him first. You remain seated beside the brazier while the priest disappears into the corridor beyond. His lantern glow shrinks slowly into darkness until only faint voices remain. You do not try listening. Some moments belong to other people. Instead, you sit quietly eating the last of the bread while the dog rests beside your boots. Heat from the brazier warms one side of your face while cold, damp air touches the other. The balance feels strangely fitting. Across the room hangs a little bunch of dried juniper tied above the chapel doorway. Protection charm. Very old. Very common. Some swear juniper smoke keeps plague away. Others say evil spirits hate the smell. Judging by the scent, evil spirits may simply possess better taste. Time passes slowly in the prison chapel. A guard walks by carrying fresh rushes. Another hauls water buckets from the well yard above. The prison wakes fully around you now, though no one ever truly relaxes down here. Stone corridors preserve tension the way cellars preserve apples. At last Father Ansel returns. His face looks older somehow. He asked for water, the priest says quietly. Edric nods and moves off again without comment. You rise from the bench slowly, adjusting your gloves. Beyond the walls, bells begin tolling the next hour. The market square will already be filling. Morning smoke will drift between stalls. Children will chase dogs through muddy alleys while merchants shout over cabbage prices as though civilization itself depends upon turnips. And above it all, under pale winter sunlight, the town waits for the day to continue exactly as expected. By the time you leave the prison level, morning has fully claimed the town. Cold sunlight spills across the market square in pale bands between drifting chimney smoke. Frost melts slowly along the edges of wagon tracks, turning the ground beneath hundreds of boots into a familiar medieval mixture of mud, straw, spilled ale, and horse dung. The air smells wonderfully alive compared to the prison below wood smoke. Onions frying in lard, wet wool cloaks steaming gently in the weak sun. The square itself unfolds before you like a restless tapestry. Merchants hammer poles into place beneath striped awnings. Bakers arrange dark rye loaves upon wooden boards. Fishwives unpack barrels packed with river eels and salted herring while loudly accusing one another of cheating customers. Somewhere nearby, a goose escapes captivity and sprints triumphantly through the crowd, pursued by an elderly woman wielding a ladle with terrifying determination. Honestly, the goose may have the best survival instincts in town. You move carefully along the edge of the square while people part around you almost unconsciously. Not dramatically. No frightened screams. Just that slight widening of space that follows your profession everywhere like an invisible fence. The dog trots beside you proudly, entirely unaware he accompanies one of the least welcome men in Christendom. Or perhaps fully aware and simply unconcerned. Near the centre of the square rises the wooden platform prepared yesterday by the Carpenters' Guild. Fresh boards, reinforced legs sunk deep into frozen ground. Sawdust still clings to the edges where tools bit into the timber. A pair of town workers adjust ropes nearby while pretending not to look at you. One finally clears his throat. "Morning." "Morning. We fixed the left side. You blink once." The widow complained again. She said it leaned worse after sunset. Naturally. No one can quite agree why medieval towns produce so many strong opinions about scaffolds. Perhaps public structures invite public criticism the same way open pies invite flies. The workers return awkwardly to their task. You continue walking. Around the platform, market life flows onward despite everything. That always strikes newcomers as strange. Public punishment rarely halts ordinary business. Medieval towns cannot afford pauses. Bread must still bake. Fish must still sell before spoiling. Rent remains owed whether someone hangs nearby or not. A peddler rings little brass bells to attract customers toward his table of combs, needles, and cheap pilgrim badges. Beside him, a woman sells hot chestnuts from an iron pan over coals. The smell drifts temptingly through the cold air. You stop long enough to buy a small paper cone of them. The woman accepts your coins without hesitation. Older than most here, with broad hands reddened by years near ovens and fires, she seems beyond caring about superstition. "Cold morning," she mutters. They usually are. "Hard frost last night." She glances briefly toward the platform. "Bad business today." You nod once. That is all. No blessing, no fear, just recognition. Oddly comforting. The chestnuts burn pleasantly against your palms through the paper wrapping. The dog receives one after staring with such theatrical suffering that refusal feels morally questionable. Nearby, bells ring from the abbey across the river. Deep bronze notes rolling through the winter air. The entire square shifts subtly around them. Merchants pause briefly to cross themselves. A few pilgrims bow heads in prayer. Even the geese seem quieter for a moment, though only briefly. Geese respect neither kings nor religion. You wander farther toward the fountain at the square's edge where water flows sluggishly beneath thin ice. Here gather the storytellers, idlers, and professional observers of human trouble. An old beggar wrapped in patched blankets mutters prophecies to anyone willing to spare a copper. Two apprentices argue over whether wolves have returned to the northern forest roads. A travelling herbalist displays jars of dried roots, fox teeth, and cloudy oils said to cure everything from gout to heartbreak. The herbalist spots you approaching. "Master Executioner," he announces too loudly. "Fine protective charms today." "Last time your charms protected nothing." "They protected me from refunds." You cannot argue with that logic. He proudly lifts a tiny leather pouch tied with a red thread. Rowan bark, saint's ash, salt from the eastern coast, keeps nightmares away. Does it? Depends how rich the nightmares are. The surrounding listeners laugh softly. You almost buy one simply for the salesmanship. Some swear executioners especially require protective charms because death lingers around them like smoke clinging to cloth. Others believe touching executioners cures certain illnesses. Strangely, both groups occasionally arrive on the same day. A woman once tried rubbing her child's sleeve against your glove to cure fever. Another spat at your boots moments later for bad luck. Human beings remain wonderfully consistent in their confusion. From across the square comes the creak of cartwheels. More people arrive steadily now from nearby villages, farmers carrying baskets of eggs, fur traders wrapped in fox pelts, monks leading mules burdened with winter ale casks for the abbey kitchens. The crowd thickens while smoke drifts overhead in pale ribbons. And always the platform remains waiting at the centre, visible from nearly every corner of the square. A reminder. The Reeve himself appears at last near the Guildhall steps, surrounded by clerks and guards. Thick fur collar, clean gloves, face pink from warmth and breakfast rather than honest outdoor suffering. Officials always seem impressively insulated from weather somehow. He notices you immediately, then approaches with careful dignity. Everything prepared as it gets. The Reeve nods briskly. Good attendance today. You glance around the square. Odd thing to praise. He lowers his voice slightly. After the grain thefts, the council wants order seen clearly. There it is. Not cruelty, not vengeance. Visibility. Medieval justice thrives on visibility the way monasteries thrive on bells. The Reeve adjusts his gloves again. There's rumour of unrest in villages north of the river. There are always rumours. Yes, he sighs, but hungry rumours travel fastest. He leaves soon after, trailing clerks behind him like anxious ducklings carrying parchment. You stand quietly beside the fountain once more. The dog curls at your boots. Snow clouds gather faintly beyond the distant hills, though sunlight still reaches the square for now. Wind rattles awnings overhead. Somewhere a child laughs. Somewhere else someone begins quietly crying before quickly stopping again. The platform waits. The crowd grows. And beneath the ordinary business of buying bread and haggling over onions, the entire town slowly turns its attention toward the same inevitable hour, approaching bell by bell through the cold medieval morning. By late morning the market square has grown thick with noise, smoke, and restless movement. The weak winter sunlight fades behind gathering clouds, leaving the town beneath a dull silver sky that presses low over the rooftops. Wind slides through the narrow streets carrying the smells of damp wool, chimney soot, frying onions, and river mud. You leave the square by the eastern lane where the crowd thins near the tannery ditch. Few respectable townsfolk linger here long if they can help it. The air grows sharper with less pleasant scents curing hides, wet straw, stagnant water, and smoke from low fires fed with whatever scraps people can spare. Executioners, unfortunately, rarely perform only executions. Your office gathers many duties others avoid whenever possible. Dead animals removed from roads, stray dogs culled during sickness outbreaks, suicides buried quietly beyond consecrated ground, filthy tasks drifting naturally toward the same pair of hands. Medieval society excels at delegation as long as someone else suffers the smell. The dog beside you glances upward briefly at that thought as though personally offended. You are exempt. You tell him. He accepts this without humility. Ahead, near the ditch beside the tanner's yard, a cartwheel has collapsed into mud. A young cooper kneels beside it, swearing softly, while an older man struggles to calm the horse still harnessed to the tilted wagon. The older man notices you first. Relief crosses his face before caution quickly follows behind it. Ah, good, you're here. I was not aware we arranged a meeting. The cooper wipes mud from his hands and stands awkwardly. Dead mule, he explains. Of course. Behind the wagon, partly hidden beneath a stained tarp, lies the unfortunate animal stiffening slowly in the cold. You crouch briefly beside it. Old age, most likely, or exhaustion. Hard winters claim beasts nearly as quickly as people, The mule's harness still bears tiny iron charms tied along the straps to ward off injury during travel. Some swear bells tied to harnesses frighten away evil spirits lurking beside roads at dusk. Others insist painted symbols near wagon wheels prevent accidents. Judging by the current state of the wagon, the spirits remain unimpressed. The older man shifts uncomfortably. "Can you move it before the square fills further?" You nod once. Together you haul the carcass onto a rough, dragging sled kept nearby for precisely such work. Mud sucks noisily at your boots while the cooper mutters apologies to the horse for language unfit for monastery ears. The dog observes everything with detached professional interest. At least no one pretends not to need you here. That almost feels refreshing. Once the mule is secured, the older man offers payment in the form of 2 small coins and half a loaf wrapped in cloth. "Bread's fresh," he says quickly, as though fearing offence. "It's fine." He hesitates, then quietly adds, "Thank you." Simple words, rare ones. You pull the sled slowly down the lane toward the refuse fields beyond the outer ditch where carcasses are burned or buried depending on weather and available labour. Crows circle overhead, already aware of business opportunities. The town changes as you walk farther from the market. Streets narrow, homes lean crookedly against one another above muddy alleys where rainwater trickles between broken stones. Laundry hangs stiff in the cold air. Children chase one another beside piles of firewood while women scrub pots at communal wells with red cracked hands. People notice you passing. A baker pauses mid-sweep outside his doorway. An old woman touches the saint charm pinned beneath her cloak. 2 apprentices abruptly decide conversation elsewhere would improve their morning considerably. Yet no one openly insults you. Not today. Perhaps winter softens judgment, or perhaps familiarity does. Towns grow accustomed to necessary discomfort eventually. Near the riverside lane you pass a tiny roadside shrine built into the wall beside a crooked oak door. Beeswax candles flicker inside before a painted saint faded nearly white by smoke and weather. Someone has left offerings there overnight. Dried apples, a cracked egg, a tiny carved wooden bird. People pray hardest during difficult winters. No one can quite agree whether roadside shrines protect travellers or simply comfort them during dangerous journeys. Even thieves sometimes leave coins there before crossing forest roads. You pause briefly beside the shrine while adjusting your grip on the sled rope. The dog sniffs the candle suspiciously. You distrust religion now too. Reasonable, honestly. Farther along, near the riverbank, stands the little hut used by plague buriers during past sickness years. Empty now, mostly. The roof sags badly under moss and old rain damage. Wind rattles loose shutters against the frame with hollow knocking sounds. Some swear the hut remains haunted by plague workers who died there generations ago. Others claim smugglers simply use the stories to keep curious children away. Medieval ghost tales often hide practical motives underneath. You leave the mule beside the refuse pit where town workers will finish the task later. Above the river, gulls wheel against darkening clouds. Snow threatens again. You pull your cloak tighter and head back toward town. By now the streets hum steadily with midday activity. Bellmakers hammer bronze near the guild quarter. Smoke rises thicker from cook fires. Tavern doors open wide enough to release bursts of warmth and laughter into the cold air, before quickly slamming shut again. The smell of stew drifts temptingly from somewhere nearby. Your stomach reminds you breakfast happened many hours ago. Near the square entrance, you stop at a pie seller's cart sheltered beneath patched canvas. Steam pours from iron tins stacked beside glowing coals. The pie seller grins broadly. Meat or mystery? Which costs less? Mystery, naturally. You buy the mystery pie. This may prove brave or foolish. Medieval dining frequently blurs those categories. The crust burns your fingers pleasantly while you lean beneath an awning beside several labourers escaping the wind. They shift uneasily once noticing you but remain where they are. Hunger outranks superstition during cold weather. Snow begins at last. Only light flakes drifting lazily through smoke-filled air. Children cheer immediately. Adults less so. A monastery bell tolls noon across the river, deep and slow. The square beyond continues filling despite the weather. Merchants pull cloaks tighter. Guards stamp boots beside the platform. Travellers crowd beneath tavern roofs sipping hot ale from clay cups. And somewhere beneath all the noise and smoke and falling snow, the town continues waiting for the hour everyone has quietly been measuring since dawn. Snow drifts softly across the town by the time you return to the gatehouse. Not a true storm yet, only thin white flakes swirling through chimney smoke and settling briefly upon cloaks before melting into dampness. The market square still murmurs with life behind you, though the sounds seem strangely muted now beneath the falling snow. Inside the gatehouse, warmth presses outward from braziers and crowded bodies. Guards move through the corridors carrying lanterns, ropes, and armfuls of fresh rushes. Someone nearby argues bitterly over missing gloves. Someone else snores loudly on a bench despite all surrounding chaos. Medieval labour, you have noticed, always includes one man somehow sleeping through catastrophe. Edric waits near the stairwell with a clay cup in hand. You disappeared. Dead mule? He nods thoughtfully. Better company than most prisoners. You remove snow from your cloak beside the brazier, while the dog shakes himself violently enough to offend everyone within several feet. A young guard curses under his breath as snow lands directly into his ale. The dog remains unapologetic. Edric lowers his voice. Father Ansel's still below. You nod once. The jailer studies the fire for a moment before speaking again. He asked for honey. Honey! For the throat and coughing. You glance toward the lower stair. Prison coughs. Cold cells. Thin blankets. None of it surprising. Still, the request settles heavily somehow. Near the brazier, a kitchen servant ladles onion broth into wooden bowls for the guards. The smell fills the chamber warmly. You accept one silently when offered. Simple food again. Broth thick with onions and barley. Dark bread hard enough to qualify as defensive weaponry. A pinch of salt precious enough that the servant watches carefully to ensure no one steals extra. The guards eat quickly between duties. One younger fellow glances toward you nervously. My grandmother used to say executioners couldn't taste food properly. You raise an eyebrow. Why? She claimed death spoiled the tongue. Another guard snorts. Your grandmother also believed eels grew from mud. She may still be right. No one can quite agree where eels come from, honestly. Even monastery scholars argue over it in dusty manuscripts while the rest of humanity simply fries them in butter and moves on. The younger guard shifts awkwardly. She also said touching your gloves cured toothaches. Did she test this theory? Once. And she lost the tooth anyway. At least the conversation improves. Outside, bells ring faintly through snow-filled air. The hour approaches. You finish the broth slowly while warmth spreads through your hands from the wooden bowl. Around you the gatehouse grows quieter despite the number of people moving within it. Conversations shorten, laughter fades. Even boots upon stone seem softer now. Preparation settles over everyone like another layer of snowfall. At last Father Ansel emerges from the lower corridor. His robes smell faintly of candle wax and damp stone. Snow has melted into his hair near the hood despite the fact he's not stepped outdoors. Underground cold does strange things to a person. He's calm, the priest says quietly. Edric exhales through his nose. That helps. The priest rubs tired fingers together near the brazier. He asked whether the bells would still ring afterward. You look at him. What did you say? The truth. Ansel gazes briefly toward the ceiling where distant bells continue faintly overhead. They always do. Silence follows. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just heavy. A clerk hurries through carrying folded parchment sealed in wax. A pair of guards disappears downstairs with lanterns. Snow taps softly against the narrow windows. The ordinary machinery of the day continues moving, whether anyone feels ready or not. Father Ansel finally notices the dog sleeping beside your boots. He's back. He appears immune to good judgment. Useful quality this winter. The priest sits carefully on the bench near the fire and unwraps a tiny cloth packet from his sleeve. Inside rests a small beeswax candle no longer than your hand. For the chapel, he says. You nod. Candles matter deeply in medieval life, more than modern people would ever understand. Light means warmth, prayer, safety, memory. A single candle flame can make stone rooms feel briefly human again. Some swear candles burning blue foretell death nearby. Others insist guttering flames reveal unseen spirits moving through a room. Given the quality of medieval windows, drafts seem a more likely explanation. Still, no one entirely ignores strange candlelight. The priest studies the little flame thoughtfully before speaking again. He asks me whether snow is a sign. Of what? Mercy. You lean back against the wall, and Father Ansel gives a faint, tired smile. I told him farmers pray for snow when winter stores run low. Travellers curse it. Children celebrate it. Monks complain their ink freezes. He shrugs softly. Perhaps signs depend on who's watching. Reasonable answer. The gatehouse door opens suddenly with a burst of cold air and drifting flakes. The reeve strides inside, wrapped heavily in fur, while two clerks stumble behind him, carrying document cases. Nearly time, he announces unnecessarily. No one answers. The reeve notices the silence at once and lowers his voice slightly. Yes, well. He brushes snow from his sleeves and approaches Edric near the stair. Formalities begin quietly then. Witnesses confirmed. Guards assigned. Records checked once more because medieval officials trust paperwork almost as much as saints. You remain near the brazier listening without truly listening. Outside the snow thickens gradually beyond the windows. The market square sounds distant now, muffled beneath weather and waiting. The dog lifts his head suddenly. Footsteps. Slow ones. The guards return from below, escorting a figure between them through the corridor toward the chapel chamber nearby. You do not look directly at first. Neither does anyone else. The prisoner walks steadily enough despite chains at the wrists. Thin, pale from cell light. Wearing a wool cloak too light for the weather. Father Ansel rises immediately and disappears beside him into the chapel room while the guards remain outside the door staring firmly at nothing. The reeve clears his throat. One clerk drops parchment from nervous fingers. Snow continues falling. And above the gatehouse, beyond the walls and smoke and cold stone corridors, the monastery bells keep marking the passing hours with calm indifference, while the town waits just outside for the next part of the day to begin. Rain replaces the snow shortly after midday. Not a dramatic storm, only that slow winter rain that seems to seep from the sky itself, cold, thin, relentless. Water slides down the gatehouse walls in dark streaks while the market square beyond dissolves into umbrellas of cloaks and dripping awnings. Mud deepens instantly beneath hundreds of boots. Inside the watch-house chamber near the main gate, guards crowd close around two braziers glowing red beneath iron grates. Wet gloves steam beside the heat. Cloaks hang from pegs along the wall, dripping steadily onto the rush-covered floor. The room smells of damp wool, onion broth, wet leather, and smoke thick enough to chew. You remain there for a while with the others, escaping the rain before the next hour arrives. The dog has wisely claimed the warmest patch beside the brazier and appears entirely unwilling to surrender it for any earthly authority. Tomas sits across from you, sharpening a short knife with slow, careful strokes. "Rain'll turn the square into soup," he mutters. "Already has." "Good. Easier for drunks to fall over before causing trouble." Another guard laughs quietly through his nose. Near the doorway, two younger watchmen argue about whether lightning ever strikes church towers deliberately. One swears it is punishment for hidden sins among clergy. The other insists towers simply stand taller than everything else. No one can quite agree whether medieval superstition causes more arguments than ale. A kettle hangs above one brazier, sending steam curling toward the rafters. A kitchen boy moves through the room, handing out cups of hot-watered wine, flavoured faintly with cloves. Expensive spices rarely appear in ordinary households, but officials and guards occasionally enjoy such luxuries during miserable weather. You accept a cup gratefully. The warmth reaches your fingers first. Outside the narrow window slits, rain taps steadily against stone. One older guard beside the fire spits thoughtfully into the rushes. "My uncle claimed rain on punishment days means the dead leave peacefully." Thomas snorts. "Your uncle also claimed cabbage cures baldness." "He had magnificent hair." "He was 80% beard." The room chuckles softly. Even here, humour survives because it must. Medieval life contains too much cold, mud, and uncertainty for people to endure it solemnly all the time. A sudden gust rattles the shutters hard enough to make one of the younger guards cross himself automatically. The older guard notices. Afraid of wind now. Bad spirits travel storms. Bad spirits travel taverns too. That explains your cousin. More quiet laughter. You sip slowly from the cup while listening to rain hammer the roof overhead. For a brief moment the watchhouse feels almost comfortable. Warm firelight, familiar voices, wet boots drying beside the brazier, the ordinary shelter of people waiting together through unpleasant weather. Then from somewhere outside comes the distant sound of hammering near the market square. Repairs. Adjustments. Preparations continuing despite the rain. The mood shifts again almost imperceptibly. Thomas wipes his blade clean against cloth. "You hear about the northern road?" he asks suddenly. "No." "Merchant caravan found abandoned near Black Pine Hill." "Bandits." He shrugs. Maybe wolves." The older guard leans closer to the fire. "Some swear that hill's cursed since the plague years." "Everything's cursed since the plague years," Tomas replies. "Fair point. Still, Black Pine Hill carries stories older than most living villages. Travellers claim strange lights move among the trees there during foggy nights. Shepherds refuse grazing nearby after sunset. One monk wrote that bells can sometimes be heard underground beneath the hill during storms. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such tales survive from genuine fear or simply because lonely roads invite imagination. Rainwater trickles beneath the watchhouse door. The kitchen boy tosses fresh peat onto the brazier. Sparks leap upward briefly, painting faces gold before fading again. One of the younger guards glances toward your satchel resting near the bench. "Do you sharpen them yourself?" The room quiets slightly. You nod once. "Must take steady hands. Mostly patience." He hesitates. "My father says execution swords shouldn't be used for anything else." He's correct. The young guard relaxes slightly, encouraged. He says cutting ordinary meat with them brings famine. Thomas rolls his eyes. Your father blames famine on everything except weather. Yet no one fully dismisses the idea either. Medieval objects gather meaning through use. Swords, bells, relics, keys all slowly absorb stories until practical tools become something heavier. Many executioners kept separate whetstones used only for official blades. Some buried broken tools rather than reusing the metal. Others refused to allow anyone else touching certain equipment at all. Ritual grows naturally wherever fear settles long enough. The rain intensifies briefly overhead. Water leaks suddenly through one section of roof, splashing directly into the older guard's lap. He stares upward in betrayal. "This building hates me." "Perhaps you're cursed," Thomas offers helpfully. "I married twice, obviously." The room laughs again, louder this time. Even you smile into the rim of your cup. Outside, the bells begin tolling through the rain. Slow, measured. The next hour, immediately conversations fade once more. A messenger enters breathless from the square, cloak soaked nearly black with rainwater. Crowd still holding, he reports to Thomas, "Reeve wants readiness." Of course he does. The messenger notices you then and falls silent awkwardly before backing toward the door again. Rain blows inward behind him, carrying the smell of wet horses and muddy streets. The dog finally rises with a long stretch beside the brazier. Time again. You set aside the empty cup and pull your gloves tighter around stiff fingers. Around the room, guards gather cloaks, belts, helmets. Firelight gleams across damp iron buckles and spearheads. Outside, the weather darkens the town into muted shades of grey and brown beneath drifting smoke. The market square waits beyond the gatehouse walls, crowded with umbrellas of cloaks and restless faces turned toward the same wooden platform standing wet beneath the rain. And somewhere amid all the bells and water and cold stone, the old medieval day continues forward exactly as it always does, steadily, heavily, 1 hour at a time. The rain eases at last to a fine mist by the time you step back into the square. Water drips steadily from awnings and roof edges. Mud glistens dark beneath the grey afternoon sky, churned smooth by hundreds of boots into something halfway between road and stew. Smoke from cook fires hangs low over the crowd, trapped beneath damp air so thick it blurs the outlines of buildings around the market. The platform waits at the centre exactly where you left it. Wet boards, dark ropes, fresh sawdust turned to paste beneath the rain. Around it, townspeople gather in quiet clusters beneath cloaks and hoods. Some stand close enough to see clearly. Others linger near market stalls pretending interest in onions or smoked fish while watching from the corners of their eyes. Children peer between adults until hurried away. Dogs wander hopefully beneath carts. Merchants continue selling bread because medieval commerce fears nothing, not even mortality. The monastery bells toll again. A slow hush spreads outward through the square. Not complete silence. Medieval towns never truly achieve silence. Somewhere a horse stamps impatiently. Somewhere a baby cries. Somewhere an irritated goose continues objecting to civilization. Yet beneath all of it comes a shared stillness, like breath held collectively. Guards move first. Thomas and the others form lines through the mud leading from the gatehouse steps toward the platform. Their cloaks drip rainwater as they take position. Then the Reeve appears beside the Guildhall carrying a rolled parchment beneath one arm. Clerks follow behind him with expressions suggesting they would rather face wolves. Reasonable. You remain near the platform checking ropes, boards, knots, routine details that must be correct regardless of weather or nerves. Your hands move automatically now from long practice. The dog settles beneath the edge of a nearby wagon where rain no longer reaches him. Father Ansel emerges from the gatehouse chapel shortly afterward, hood raised against the mist. He walks beside the prisoner quietly while two guards follow several paces behind. No chains now except those at the wrists. The crowd shifts uneasily as they cross the square. You keep your gaze low, professional, steady. The prisoner looks smaller outdoors somehow. Cold air and open sky do that to people after weeks underground. Rain has flattened dark hair against a pale forehead. Boots slip slightly in the mud, but the guards do not force the pace. The priest murmurs prayers too softly to hear over the bells. Some in the crowd cross themselves. Others stare openly. One woman begins quietly sobbing into her cloak while the man beside her pretends not to notice. No one can quite agree whether public punishments strengthen order or simply remind everyone how fragile life already feels. Medieval rulers insist upon the first explanation. Ordinary people often suspect both. The reeve steps forward onto the platform. Rainwater drips from the edge of his fur collar while he unrolls the parchment carefully beneath the misting sky. His voice carries across the square, practiced and formal. Charges, witnesses, judgment. Words polished smooth by centuries of repetition. Most people listen only halfway. They already know the story through tavern gossip, market whispers, and exaggerated retelling shared beside hearths all week. Public readings exist less to inform than to confirm. Ritual matters deeply here. Even now, amid wet cloaks and muddy boots, the ceremony unfolds with careful order. The bells fall silent at last. Only rain remains. You glance briefly toward Father Ansel, standing beside the prisoner near the platform steps. The priest's lips still move quietly in prayer, while one hand grips the little wooden cross hidden partly inside his sleeve. The prisoner says something softly to him. The priest nods once, then looks toward you. A small gesture. Time. You step forward through the wet sawdust. The crowd seems farther away suddenly, though they stand only yards beyond the guards. Faces blur together beneath hoods and drifting mist. Candlelight flickers faintly from nearby shop windows already glowing against the dark afternoon. Your movements remain calm, measured. Everything here depends upon calmness. The old stories always exaggerate such moments afterward. They speak of dramatic speeches, curses, sudden storms, heavenly signs. Truth usually arrives quieter, wet ropes, cold hands, rainwater sliding from wooden beams, the smell of mud and smoke drifting through crowded air. Some swear ravens gathering nearby foretell unrest after executions. Others believe silence among birds means divine approval. Today only a few crows perch atop the Guildhall roof, looking mildly inconvenienced by weather. The reeve lowers the parchment. Father Ansel finishes the final prayer. The square holds still. You perform your duty swiftly and without spectacle. No graphic detail lingers here, only sound and atmosphere and the heavy rhythm of ritual carried forward through generations. The platform creaks softly beneath shifting weight. A woman gasps somewhere in the crowd. Rain taps against wood. Then comes stillness. Not dramatic, not triumphant. Simply stillness settling slowly across the square beneath the grey sky. The bells begin again after several long moments. Deep bronze notes rolling outward over rooftops and chimneys and muddy streets. The crowd exhales almost together. People begin moving immediately afterward, as they always do. Some leave quickly without speaking. Others linger, discussing what they witnessed in low voices, already reshaping memory into story. Merchants reopen negotiations over bread prices within minutes because hunger remains punctual regardless of philosophy. A child asks loudly whether the rain will stop before supper. Life resumes. That may be the strangest part. Father Ansel bows his head briefly before stepping down from the platform. His face looks pale with exhaustion. The reeve speaks quietly, with clerks already worrying over records and witness marks. Guards relax shoulders stiff from standing in rain, and you remain where you are for another moment while mist drifts through the square and bells continue echoing from the abbey across the river. The dog emerges from beneath the wagon at last and pads slowly toward you through the mud. Steady as ever, around you the medieval town breathes onward into afternoon smoky, cold, weary, alive while the rain continues falling softly upon stone walls, market stalls, and the old wooden platform standing silent at the centre of it all. The crowd thins slowly after the bells fade. Not all at once. Medieval towns empty reluctantly, like taverns after midnight or monasteries after free soup. People drift away in clusters beneath dripping cloaks, still murmuring to one another while mud sucks at their boots. Merchants return fully to business. Children reappear cautiously at the edges of the square. Life folds itself back into ordinary shapes with unsettling speed. Rainwater continues dripping from the platform beside you. The reeve and his clerks disappear first, eager for dry rooms and official records. Guards follow gradually once Thomas finishes assigning the last watches. Even Father Ansel retreats toward the chapel, with shoulders bowed from weariness. Soon only a handful remain. You, 2 town workers, the dog, and the quiet afterward. That quiet always feels different from ordinary silence, heavier somehow, like the square itself pauses briefly before deciding whether to continue breathing. You pull your gloves tighter and begin the less celebrated part of the work. Cleaning. There's always cleaning. Wet sawdust must be swept aside. Ropes checked and stored properly. Boards scrubbed before cold evening air freezes everything stiff by nightfall. Medieval towns prefer justice visible, but aftermath invisible whenever possible. One of the workers hands you a bucket without meeting your eyes. Cold one today? You nod. Water sloshes grey against the bucket rim while mist curls low through the square. Nearby, a pie seller loudly advertises fresh rabbit stew as though trying personally to restore normality. Honestly, admirable effort. You kneel beside the platform steps and begin washing mud from the lower boards. Rain taps steadily against your hood while your fingers numb slowly inside damp gloves. The dog watches from beneath a cartwheel, clearly delighted someone else works while he supervises. Across the square, market business grows louder again now that tension has broken. Haggling resumes. A fiddler near the alehouse plays badly but enthusiastically. Smoke rises thicker from roasting chestnut stalls as afternoon deepens toward evening. No one can quite agree why public punishments attract crowds when most people afterward hurry away pretending indifference. Perhaps witnessing reminds them they survived another difficult season. Perhaps fear simply gathers humans together the way warmth gathers cats near fires. Or perhaps medieval people, like modern ones, remain endlessly curious about trouble that belongs to somebody else. The younger town worker beside you wrings rainwater from a cloth. My mother says storms after executions mean heaven's angry. The older worker snorts. Your mother blames weather for everything. She predicted the mill fire. She predicted 12 fires. One finally happened. Reasonable strategy, honestly. You continue scrubbing quietly while they argue beside the platform. Their voices blend with wagon creaks and distant bells into the familiar rhythm of town life resettling itself. At last the younger worker lowers his voice slightly. Is it true executioners can't be buried in churchyards? The older man mutters immediately, Don't ask. But you answer anyway. Depends on the town. The younger worker hesitates. And here, you glance toward the abbey towers beyond drifting mist. No one's decided yet. That silences him effectively. Some towns bury executioners beyond consecrated ground beside thieves and wanderers. Others allow burial only at night without bells. A few accept them normally after generous donations to monasteries, which perhaps reveals the true miracle-working power of silver. The older worker shifts uncomfortably. My grandfather said one executioner in the south kept bees. You pause briefly. Bees, said the honey-cured fever's better than monastery remedies. The younger worker frowns. That sounds made up. Most useful knowledge does. You almost smile again. Beekeeping actually suits solitary men. Many medieval executioners held secondary trades because official duties rarely provided enough income. Some farmed, some treated animals. A few served as unofficial healers since they understood anatomy better than most physicians willing to admit it. Strange profession, half feared, half needed, entirely lonely. The rain finally begins weakening near sunset. Pale light slips briefly beneath the clouds, turning puddles silver across the square. Smoke from evening cook fires drifts low between buildings carrying wonderful smells. Outward cabbage stew, roasting onions, fresh bread, garlic simmering in lard. Your stomach notices immediately. The workers finish stacking cleaned boards beside the platform while you coil wet ropes carefully into the storage chest beneath the scaffold. Ritual again. Tools maintained properly, knots checked twice, nothing neglected. Some swear careless storage invites accidents later. Others believe abandoned ropes attract wandering spirits during storms. Medieval people rarely waste opportunities to combine practical advice with supernatural terror. The dog wanders over finally, sniffing at the damp wood. You contributed nothing, you inform him. He appears unconcerned. From the alley near the fountain comes sudden laughter. A group of apprentices races through the square, throwing clumps of wet snow at one another, while an exhausted baker shouts threats behind them. One slips directly into a puddle deep enough to soak him clear to the knees. The others collapse laughing. Even the baker eventually gives up pretending anger. And just like that, the square feels ordinary again. Not entirely, never entirely, but close enough. You straighten slowly, back aching from cold and labour. Evening bells begin sounding from the abbey towers beyond the river, softer now through damp air and gathering dusk. Shops start closing shutters against the coming night. Lanterns flicker awake beneath tavern signs. Geese complain loudly somewhere unseen. The platform stands cleaned and silent behind you, already becoming merely another structure in the square until next time necessity drags it back into importance. And as the town settles gradually toward evening warmth and supper fires, you remain for one final moment beneath the fading grey sky, listening to the bells roll gently across wet rooftops, while the old medieval day moves onward without pause. By the time you leave the square, evening has settled over the town like a heavy wool blanket dampened by rain. Lanterns glow behind shuttered windows in wavering gold patches. Smoke thickens above rooftops as households light supper fires against the cold. Water still drips from eaves into muddy lanes, though the rain itself has mostly passed eastward toward the river marshes. Your boots ache. Your shoulders ache. Even your cloak feels tired. The dog trots faithfully beside you through the dim streets, occasionally stopping to investigate smells of enormous personal importance. You head toward the alehouse near the Cooper's Lane, drawn less by thirst than warmth. The place is called the Crooked Pike, though no one remembers whether the original sign depicted a fish or a weapon. Years of smoke and weather have transformed it into something resembling an angry turnip. Inside, warmth rushes over you immediately. Not clean warmth. Alehouse warmth. Thick with smoke, damp wool, roasting onions, spilled beer, wet boots drying beside the hearth, and at least 3 kinds of poor decisions. Perfect. The common room glows orange beneath dozens of beeswax candles and tallow lamps hanging from blackened rafters. Rushes crunch beneath boots. A fiddler near the corner hearth plays softly while travellers hunch over steaming bowls of stew. Conversation dips briefly as you enter, then resumes. That is usually the best outcome. The innkeeper, Marta, glances up from behind the ale barrels and nods once toward your usual corner near the wall. No words needed. You settle onto the bench beneath a narrow window fogged with condensation, while the dog immediately collapses beside the hearth, as though he personally owns the establishment. Honestly, he nearly does by now. Marta arrives carrying a clay mug and a bowl before you even order. Barley stew, she says, and ale. You read minds now. You always look miserable after rain. Fair. The stew smells wonderful. Thick barley, onions, cabbage, and small pieces of salted pork floating beneath steam. Medieval food rarely wins awards for beauty, but after cold labour and wet weather, beauty becomes less important than heat. Around you the alehouse hums quietly with evening life. A pair of fur traders argue over river tolls. 3 pilgrims dry cloaks beside the fire while comparing blisters from the northern road. A merchant loudly insists his cousin once saw a mermaid near the western marshes after too much pear cider. No one entirely believes him. Not even the cousin, probably. You tear bread slowly into the stew while warmth returns to stiff fingers. At the next table, 2 carters lower their voices slightly upon recognizing you. Heard they found another body near Black Pine Hill. Bandits again. Maybe wolves. Wolves don't steal boots. The first man shrugs uneasily. No one can quite agree what's living in those woods now. That road again. Black Pine Hill returns to conversation the way damp returns to old walls. Travellers fear lonely forests for good reason. Roads beyond town walls grow dangerous quickly during hard winters. Bandits, starving deserters, wolves, fever, frozen streams hidden beneath snow. Add enough fog and imagination handles the rest enthusiastically. Marta returns carrying roasted chestnuts in a cloth pouch. From the square, she says, before they went cold. You nod grateful thanks. The fiddler shifts tunes near the hearth. Slower now, sleepier. The kind of music that settles into wooden beams alongside smoke and old stories. At the pilgrim's table, one grey-haired traveller begins describing miracles supposedly witnessed at a distant shrine. Healing spring beneath the chapel floor, he murmurs. Blind girl washed her eyes there and saw sunlight same day. Another pilgrim snorts softly. Or maybe she simply opened them. The grey-haired man ignores him. Some swear saints choose only humble folk for miracles. Convenient for saints, the second pilgrim mutters. You hide a faint smile behind your mug. Pilgrim roads breed stories the way marshes breed insects. Every shrine possesses miracles. Every monastery preserves relics. Every traveller knows someone whose cousin was cured by sacred water, holy dust, or suspiciously expensive candles. Still, people keep walking those roads. Hope travels remarkably well in cold weather. A serving girl passes carrying trenchers piled with smoked fish while trying unsuccessfully not to stare at you. She cannot be more than 16, new to town perhaps. The older regulars barely notice you anymore. Fear dulls with familiarity eventually. Marta wipes spilled ale from the table beside yours. Crowd behaved today. Mostly. Good. She lowers her voice. Last hanging during famine season nearly started a riot. You remember. Cold spring. Empty grain stores. Too many armed men in one square. The memory still tastes unpleasant. The innkeeper sighs heavily. Bad winters make everyone strange. That's one explanation. Near the hearth, laughter suddenly erupts as one of the fur traders loses a dice game spectacularly. Coins scatter across the table. The dog lifts his head briefly in disappointment before realizing none of the noise involves food. Outside, the fog thickens beyond the alehouse windows. Evening deepens. More travellers arrive shaking rainwater from cloaks before crowding gratefully toward the fire. Someone orders hot spiced ale. Someone else begins singing softly off-key about a miller's daughter and an unfortunate goose. Medieval songs truly adore geese. You finish the stew slowly while exhaustion settles heavier into your bones now that warmth surrounds you. The tension of the day loosens little by little beside the hearth. Around you, ordinary life continues. Geese clatter. Alipores. Boots steam dry. Stories drift through candle smoke toward the rafters. And for a brief hour inside the glowing warmth of the crooked pike, you become almost invisible again, not the executioner standing in rain before a crowd, but simply another tired soul seeking heat, bread, and shelter from the long medieval winter night gathering outside. You leave the alehouse sometime after the evening bells. Warmth clings stubbornly to your cloak for the first few steps outside before the night air steals it away again. Fog has settled thick across the town now, drifting low through the lanes and softening every lantern into blurred golden halos. Water still drips from rooftops in slow, patient rhythms. The dog emerges reluctantly from the hearthside comfort behind you, casting one long, mournful glance back toward the alehouse door. You survived terrible hardship, you tell him. He ignores the insult. The monastery lies beyond the river bridge at the western edge of town where the fog gathers deepest among the reeds. Father Ansel asked earlier if you might carry a sealed letter there after supper records for the Abbey Infirmary. Something concerning winter fever cases in nearby villages. Monks trust you with errands because few thieves willingly rob executioners. A surprisingly practical arrangement. You walk slowly through narrowing streets where shutters are already barred for the night. Candlelight flickers behind cracks in oak doors. Somewhere unseen, families gather around hearths sharing dark bread and pottage, while wind brushes softly against the walls. The town feels gentler at night. Smaller. More honest. Without the noise of markets and crowds. You notice quieter details instead, a spinning wheel humming behind thin walls, the smell of rosemary smoke drifting from sick rooms, iron chains creaking softly above hanging shop signs. At the bridge entrance stands a roadside shrine sheltered beneath a little roof of warped shingles. Beeswax candles burn there before a painted virgin blackened almost beyond recognition by smoke and age. Fresh flowers rest at the base despite winter. Someone loved enough to brave the cold tonight. You pause briefly beside the shrine while fog drifts across the river below. The dog sniffs suspiciously at the offerings again. Still distrustful. Reasonable position. The river moves dark and slow beneath the bridge arches, carrying reflections of monastery lanterns trembling across the water. Somewhere downstream comes the hollow knock of a boatman securing ropes for the night. Beyond the bridge rise the abbey walls. Tall, silent, pale stone glowing faintly through the fog. Monasteries always feel slightly separate from the rest of the world, as though ordinary time slows once you pass through their gates. Bells rule everything their waking, prayer, meals, sleep. Even breathing seems organized. The porter monk recognizes you immediately when you knock. Brother Luke. Round-faced, red-cheeked, smelling pleasantly of bread ovens and lamp oil. You're late, he says cheerfully. You're awake. Sadly. He unlatches the little wicket gate and waves you inside. Warmth drifts through the cloister yard from hidden kitchens and workshops. Lanterns burn beneath covered walkways where rainwater still drips steadily from tiled roofs. Herb gardens sleep beneath winter cloth coverings, while bare apple trees creak softly in the wind. The abbey smells wonderfully alive. Ink, beeswax, wet stone, fresh bread, drying herbs hanging in bundles beneath the eaves. Brother Luke takes the sealed letter carefully. Infirmary records. So I'm told. Wonderful, he sighs dramatically. Nothing says joy like monastery paperwork. Monks complain about copying records the way soldiers complain about boots, constantly and with complete justification. You follow him through the cloister toward the scriptorium where candlelight glows warmly behind horn-paned windows. Inside, scribes still labour despite the late hour, bent over parchment beneath hanging lamps. Scratch, scratch, scratch. An entire room devoted to handwriting and back pain. One young monk looks up briefly as you pass. Ink stains cover his sleeves clear to the elbows. Evening, he murmurs politely before returning immediately to copying lines from a massive illuminated manuscript spread across the desk. Brother Luke shakes his head. Third Gospel this winter. Why copy the same book repeatedly? Because the last two got damp. Fair enough. Medieval preservation methods remain optimistic at best. The infirmary lies beyond the cloister near the herb garden wall. As you approach, stronger smells emerge from the warm interior: vinegar, lavender oil, rosemary smoke, and something bitter beneath it all. Illness. A weary nun accepts the letter at the door while muttering thanks. Behind her, rows of narrow beds line the chamber where fever patients sleep beneath heavy wool blankets. Some cough weakly in the darkness. Others simply lie still, listening to monastery bells drifting through the walls. No one can quite agree whether monks truly heal the sick better than village herbalists. Yet monasteries possess warm rooms, clean water, and actual beds, which already places them ahead of most medieval medicine. Brother Luke gestures toward the kitchen afterward. You'll have soup before leaving. That sounded less like invitation and more like command. We're monks. We specialize in polite commands. The kitchen proves blissfully warm. Huge iron pots simmer over glowing hearths, while kitchen brothers knead bread dough beside long oak tables dusted white with flour. Steam fogs the rafters overhead. You sit near the fire with a bowl of leek soup thick enough to stand a spoon upright. The dog receives scraps immediately from several delighted novices despite strict monastery rules against animals indoors. Rules weaken considerably around sad-looking dogs. Brother Luke lowers himself onto the bench opposite you with an exhausted groan. 3 pilgrims arrived sick today, he says, and one convinced he's cursed. Is he? Probably, but mostly with stupidity. You eat quietly while monks move around the kitchen carrying loaves, herbs, and steaming kettles through the warm candlelit haze. Outside, the abbey bells begin ringing Compline the final prayer before sleep. Soft, slow, comforting. The entire monastery seems to exhale with them. Lanterns dim along the cloisters. Voices lower naturally. Even the wind outside sounds gentler now, moving through bare winter branches beyond the walls. And for a little while beside the monastery hearth, wrapped in warmth and candlelight and the smell of fresh bread, the hard edges of the long medieval day finally begin to soften. You leave the monastery beneath a sky the colour of old iron. The fog has thinned somewhat while you sat beside the abbey hearth, though mist still clings low across the river banks and frozen fields beyond the town. The bells of Compline continue echoing faintly behind you as the porter monk bars the gate for the night. Ahead stretches the river road. Quiet now, dark, the kind of medieval road where every shadow becomes either a wandering pilgrim or a shrub pretending very confidently to be one. You pull your cloak tighter and begin the walk homeward along the water. The dog trots beside you, considerably happier after acquiring half the monastery kitchen through emotional manipulation. The river glides black beside the path, carrying pale reflections of distant lanterns downstream between reeds crusted with frost. Wind moves softly through bare willow branches overhead, with a dry whispering sound like parchment turning. Beyond the town walls, the world grows larger and lonelier very quickly. Fields spread outward beneath the night mist where winter crops sleep beneath hard soil. Low stone fences rise and vanish again through fog. Far away, tiny watchfires glow orange atop scattered farmsteads. Somewhere in the darkness an owl calls once. Then silence returns. You pass a roadside cross planted beside the ditch many years ago after a cart driver froze there during a blizzard. Travellers still leave little offerings at its base: copper coins, ribbons, dried flowers in warmer months. Tonight someone has left a small loaf of bread, half frozen already. No one can quite agree whether roadside offerings comfort the dead or merely reassure the living that someone noticed their passing. Either way, people continue leaving them generation after generation. The dog sniffs the bread hopefully. No, he looks wounded by this injustice. The road curves gently northward beside low marsh fields silvered by moonlight finally breaking through the clouds. Frost gathers again across the grass. Your boots crunch softly now instead of sinking through mud. Winter tightening its grip once more. Ahead comes the slow rattle of wheels. A small ox cart emerges gradually through the mist carrying bundled firewood beneath canvas sheets. The driver sits hunched beneath layers of wool and fur, lantern swinging dimly beside him. He raises a hand as you pass. Evening, evening. Road clear ahead. So far. The old driver nods gratefully. Travellers exchange such information constantly during winter journeys. Flooded roads, broken bridges, wolves near forests, suspicious men with crossbows pretending to be pilgrims. Medieval survival depends heavily upon shared warnings. The cart creaks onward into the dark. Soon even the lantern glow disappears. Farther along, near the old ferry crossing, you spot movement beside the roadside shrine built into a ruined Roman stone marker. A figure crouches there warming hands over a tiny sheltered candle. A beggar, wrapped in patched blankets and wearing boots held together mostly by faith. He glances up nervously as you approach. Peace on your road. And yours. You toss him the remaining piece of monastery bread from your satchel. His eyes widen. Saints keep you warm tonight. Unlikely. Still, he smiles faintly. People speak blessings freely during hard winters because blessings cost nothing and warmth costs everything. The dog considers following the bread briefly before choosing loyalty instead, or perhaps laziness. The road rises slightly beyond the marshes where leafless trees crowd closer together. Black Pine Hill waits somewhere farther north beyond sight, hidden behind drifting fog and forest. Even from here the woods look uneasy. A little too still. A little too dark between the trunks. Some swear bells ring beneath those hills during storms because plague victims were buried there without proper rites. Others insist smugglers spread the tales deliberately to keep travellers away from hidden camps. Even now, it is hard to tell where fear ends and practicality begins. Wind moves suddenly through the pines with a long hollow sigh. The dog stops walking. Ears raised. You pause too. For several moments neither of you moves at all. Then from somewhere deep among the trees comes only the sound of branches shifting against one another. Nothing more. Probably. You continue walking. The road bends back toward town fields soon afterward where the fog thins again across open ground. Relief settles quietly into your shoulders despite yourself. Funny how quickly forests remind people they remain small. Ahead, a lone lantern bobs through the mist toward you. Another traveller, this one wrapped in a pilgrim's cloak pinned with tin badges reflecting pale moonlight. A walking staff taps rhythmically against frozen earth as he approaches. "Tough night for roads," he says. "Tough season." "Aye." The pilgrim glances briefly toward your satchel and gloves before recognition flickers across his face. Yet instead of shrinking away, he merely nods thoughtfully. "Hard office," he murmurs. You shrug. Someone does it. The pilgrim studies the road behind you for a moment. "In my village," he says quietly, "we pray for executioners during midwinter mass. That surprises you enough to stop walking." "Why?" "Priest says every kingdom asks certain men to carry burdens others refuse." The wind shifts softly through the frosted reeds. The pilgrim adjusts his cloak. No one should carry such things alone. Then he continues down the road before you can answer. His lantern glow drifts gradually into the fog until only darkness remains again. You stand there a while, listening to distant water and winter wind moving through the fields. Strange how a few simple words can linger longer than bells. At last the dog nudges impatiently against your leg. Home waits ahead. Beyond the next rise, faint through the mist, you can already see the outer lanterns near the town wall flickering gold against the cold medieval night. The town gate stands half-closed when you return. Lanterns sway above the archway in the night wind, casting long crooked shadows across the muddy road. The guards on evening watch huddle near a brazier just inside the walls with cloaks pulled tight around their shoulders. One squints through the mist as you approach. "Thought you'd frozen out there." "Disappointed." "Moderately." He lifts the bar enough to let you through while the dog slips past first as though personally important. Inside the walls, the town has quieted at last. Not silent. Never silent. But softer now. The market stall stands shuttered beneath wet canvas covers. Ash drifts lazily from dying cook fires. Somewhere distant. A baby cries briefly before being soothed again. Footsteps echo along empty lanes where only a few late travellers hurry home beneath hooded cloaks. You walk slowly toward your lodging near the outer wall. Every part of your body feels weighted now by the long day. Damp wool presses heavily across your shoulders. Your hands ache from cold and labour. Even the satchel hanging at your side seems fuller somehow, despite holding less than it did at dawn. The dog trots faithfully ahead before stopping suddenly beside a butcher's doorway. "Hopeful?" "Always hopeful." "No." He sighs with theatrical despair. Your lodging waits dark except for the faint glow of embers visible through the shutter cracks. Frost gathers silver along the roof edges already. Winter wastes no time reclaiming warmth once fires fade. Inside, the familiar little room greets you with all the charm of an exhausted boot. Still, it is yours. You latch the door against the wind and kneel immediately beside the hearth, stirring embers back to life beneath fresh peat and kindling. Smoke curls upward through the chimney slowly at first before the flames finally catch. Warmth returns inch by inch. The dog circles twice near the fire and collapses heavily onto the rushes with a grunt suggesting he personally carried civilization on his back today. You remove your cloak carefully and hang it near the hearth where steam rises almost instantly from the damp wool. Gloves follow, boots after that with considerable relief. The room smells of smoke, wet leather, old straw, and faint rosemary from the herbs hanging overhead. Home. You light 2 beeswax candles beside the table. Their golden glow pushes shadows softly into the corners where tools and shelves emerge once more from darkness. Now comes the quieter work. The work no crowd sees. You set the satchel upon the table and begin unpacking each item methodically. Leather straps first, wiped dry with cloth, buckles checked for rust, knots inspected carefully beneath candlelight, then the whetstone wrapped in wool. Finally, the tools themselves. You clean them slowly with warm water and oil while the fire crackles softly nearby. The motions feel practiced enough to become almost meditative after years of repetition. Outside, wind brushes against the shutters. Inside, only small sounds remain. Cloth against steel. Peat shifting in the hearth. The dog snoring faintly beside the fire. No one can quite agree whether executioners treated their tools with ritual because of superstition or professionalism. Probably both. Some prayed while sharpening blades. Some burned herbs nearby for protection. Others insisted tools should never touch bare earth after use. You understand the instinct, at least. Certain objects gather weight beyond metal and wood. You finish oiling the blade and wrap it carefully once more before returning everything to the oak chest beside the bed. The lid closes with a low, heavy thud. Done. For today. At the shelf above the hearth sits your small pouch of coins, earned through the town's unpleasant necessities. You empty today's payment onto the table and count quietly by candlelight. Not much. Enough for bread, fuel, leather repairs perhaps. Necessary men rarely become wealthy ones. You set aside 2 coins separately for the monastery alms box next market day. Habit more than devotion. Father Ansel never asks, but Abbey kitchens feed enough hungry travellers through winter that guilt eventually outweighs stinginess. The wind rattles the shutters harder suddenly. Somewhere outside, footsteps splash through puddles before fading away down the lane. You warm your hands over the fire and stare into the flames a while. Exhaustion settles deep now that stillness surrounds you completely. The events of the day drift through memory in fragments rather than scenes, rain striking the scaffold boards, bells rolling through fog, warm soup in the monastery kitchen, the pilgrim's lantern disappearing along the road, and that strange sentence lingering afterward. No one should carry such things alone. You glance toward the dog asleep beside the hearth. Well, you murmur quietly, too late now. One ear twitches. Nothing more. From beneath the bed, you pull a small clay jug of watered ale and pour a little into a cup. The drink tastes flat and smoky, but pleasantly warm after sitting near the fire all evening. On the shelf above hangs the tarnished pilgrim badge, still blackened by years of soot and handling. You turn it thoughtfully between your fingers. Some swear old relics protect lonely houses from wandering spirits during midwinter nights. Others believe forgotten saints grow resentful if neglected too long. Medieval people maintained complicated relationships with objects they barely trusted. You set the badge back carefully. The candles burn lower. Firelight softens the rough stone walls into warmer shades of amber and gold. Outside, the town settles deeper into sleep with every passing bell. Even the wind quiets gradually. At last you spread fresh straw beneath the blanket, add another piece of peat to the hearth, and prepare for rest beneath the soot-dark rafters, while winter presses softly against the walls outside. The fire burns lower as the night deepens. Not out entirely, only softened now into slow red embers beneath a skin of silver ash. Their glow reaches lazily across the stone floor where the rushes whisper whenever the wind creeps beneath the door. Above, the rafters disappear into darkness threaded with faint smoke drifting toward the chimney. The town beyond your walls grows quieter with each passing bell. A cart rattles somewhere far away and then fades. A dog barks once. Then stillness returns again. You sit for a while longer beside the hearth with the clay cup warming your hands, listening to the old building settle around you. Timber creaks softly in the cold. Water drips from the eaves outside. Wind brushes against the shutters with the gentle sound of someone turning pages slowly in another room. The dog sleeps heavily near the fire, paws twitching faintly as though chasing rabbits through dreams kinder than most waking days. Your own bones feel heavy now, the sort of deep tiredness only winter labour brings. Not dramatic exhaustion, just the slow ache of carrying wet wood, walking muddy roads, standing too long in cold rain, breathing smoke-thick air from dawn until dark. Medieval life wears people down gradually, like rivers wearing stone. You lean back against the wall and close your eyes briefly. The day drifts through your thoughts in scattered fragments. Morning frost beneath the gatehouse. The smell of chestnuts in the market square. Father Ansel warming pale hands beside the prison brazier. Snow melting into rain across the scaffold boards. Lantern light moving through monastery fog. The pilgrim's quiet voice along the river road. No one should carry such things alone. Outside, the bells ring once more from the abbey across the river. Late now. Very late. Their sound arrives softened by distance and mist, rolling gently across rooftops and frozen fields before fading into the winter dark. The bells have marked every hour of this long day from before dawn until now. Bakers heard them, monks heard them, merchants, prisoners, travellers, guards, widows, children, and you, always you. No one can quite agree whether monastery bells comfort people because they promise order, or because they remind everyone that time continues moving no matter what sorrow passes beneath them. Perhaps both. The fire settles with a soft hiss. You rise slowly at last and cross the room, carrying the final candle toward the bed. Shadows sway along the walls as you move. The little lodging feels smaller now in the dimness, almost hidden beneath warm darkness and drifting smoke. You pull the wool blanket aside. Straw rustles beneath the mattress ticking. Cold sheets greet you honestly. Medieval beds never pretend otherwise. Before lying down, you pause briefly at the shutter and push it open a finger's width. Night air slips inward carrying the smell of frost, peat smoke, and distant river water. The town lies mostly dark beyond the wall now. Only a few lanterns remain glowing in upper windows where someone tends a sick child, finishes mending boots, copies monastery records, or waits for sleep that refuses to come easily. Above the rooftops, clouds drift slowly apart. A few pale stars emerge, quiet ones, far away enough to seem untouched by muddy roads and winter hunger and all the small burdens carried through medieval days. Somewhere beyond the town, carts still creak along frozen roads beneath those same stars. Pilgrims still walk through pine forests carrying candles toward distant shrines. Fishermen mend nets by lantern light beside black rivers. Monks kneel in cold chapels whispering midnight prayers while candles burn low before worn stone saints. And here, inside this little room pressed against the town wall, you finally allow the long day to loosen its grip. You close the shutter gently. The final candle flickers beside the bed. Its small flame paints gold across the old pilgrim badge hanging above the hearth, across the satchel resting silent beside the oak chest, across the sleeping dog curled tightly near the embers. Everything softer now, everything slower. You lie beneath the wool blanket and listen as the fire settles lower and lower into glowing red quiet. The warmth reaches you gradually while wind brushes faintly against the walls outside like distant surf. The town sleeps. The market square stands empty beneath frost. Rainwater freezes silver along the scaffold boards left silent in darkness. Beyond the abbey, the river moves steadily through mist beneath moonlight. And somewhere out there, beyond roads and fields and watchfires, winter continues unfolding across the medieval world exactly as it has for countless generations, slowly, patiently, beneath bells and stars and drifting chimney smoke. Your breathing eases. The room grows dimmer. Even the ache in your hands begins fading into warmth. There will be another dawn eventually. Another bell. Another cold road through mist. But not yet. For now there is only the quiet hearth, the heavy blanket, the distant fading bells, and the comforting darkness settling gently through the rafters above while the old medieval town disappears little by little into sleep beside you. The fire lowers once more. A final ember glows softly, then softer still, and at last the night carries everything into stillness.